with the commute optimization thing, and we collected data. Well, do you know how I collected that data? I walked into grocery stores and I walked up to employees and I said, I'm doing a survey on commute issues and commute strain for people. Would you be willing to tell me the postcode, the zip code from where you commute from? Obviously, I'm not going to ask people for their home address to
Right.
get here, and whether you travel on public transport or whether you drive, or other. And I went to, and
Yes.
I got 250 data points and got kicked out of 3 grocery stores. So any founder who comes up to me and tells me that they can't get real data, they don't know who to talk to, I say, it's there. You need to figure it out.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Decision Intelligence Lab. Along with my co-founder, Michael Watson from Northwestern University, I'm Vijay Mehrotra, and I'm pleased to introduce today's guest, Richard Savoie, the CEO and co-founder of Adiona, a company that's specializing in high volume and high density last mile delivery optimization, and with a particular attention and flavor focus on emissions reduction. Rich has a super interesting background that includes electrical engineering degree, from which he's still recovering, work with medical devices, and a lot of different work around commercializing research and keeping kind of financial efficiency at the forefront while also, making those breakthrough research things come to life and have real world impact. So, uh, welcome, Rich, and let me turn it over to you, Mike.
Yeah, Rich, why don't you kick it off and give us a little overview of what your company does?
Thanks for having me, gentlemen. Really appreciate the opportunity, and I think it's well aligned with what we do. Decisions are at the core of what we all do every day, even when we don't know it. Our left brain trying to run the show while our right brain keeps up and gives us heart. But we take that really seriously at Adiona, because what we want to do is to create 3 pillars in logistics, which is financial efficiency, reducing costs for companies, using that as an enabler to reduce emissions, because transport is the second largest global emitter of greenhouse gases and is on track to be the number one emitter of greenhouse gases in the next few years. And so we desperately need to be able to reduce emissions in that industry. And by reducing emissions via financial efficiency, we want to then also enable a better work-life balance and just workforce satisfaction for people in supply chain, which is notoriously a very difficult place to work. It's very physical. It's the backbone of the global economy. Really, it's like the operating system that runs the global economy, and it's very difficult work for the people in it. And there's massive labor shortages in that space. Automation is required. It's really more of an opportunity than a threat. So those 3 things we think work really well in harmony together. And our first entry point into that world is through last mile delivery optimization, which we're expanding out of slowly over time as we grow. But the reason being that in that cost and emissions standpoint, the last mile piece is the most expensive and the most emissions intense part of the supply chain movements. So hopefully that gives you an idea of why we're doing what we're doing, and then of course we can always talk about how we do that.
Yeah, can we drill? I'd like to drill into that last bit, Rich. What makes the last mile so hard? In kind of what kind of opportunities do you guys see or have you found for optimization there?
Well, for people who aren't familiar with optimization, I guess wholly, which I wasn't previously, and Vijay, thanks for the intro. My background is in electrical engineering, so I don't come from an optimization or an operations background particularly, but I was aware of the complexities of delivery and transport just through my engineering lens of building medical devices, right? So working with people in manufacturing and building physical products that needed to ship out into the world. And I did that with both big and small companies, and was able to understand the complexity of taking a product. Well, let's go full stop from beginning to end, right? For people who maybe aren't familiar with supply chain or optimization, you know, anything you look around your room, you look at the lamp behind you, VJ. Somebody dug something out of the ground and cut down some trees and sent raw materials to a factory where they were assembled into components. Those components then probably got shipped somewhere else where they were assembled into a lamp. Then that lamp got shipped somewhere else into a warehouse where it was ready to either be delivered to your house directly or to a store where you went and bought it. And so that end to end supply chain set of movements, um, when you're shipping in bulk, say millions of screws that will go into building lamps, that's generally a pretty cost-effective thing because you've just got a container full of screws that's going to go across in a container ship in the ocean, right? Likewise, the kind of middle mile component of taking all those smaller components and shipping them in bulk to a place that's going to assemble the lamp is generally a bit more efficient. You get down to that last movement, though, where it's in a warehouse and it needs to be shipped to either the local store where you bought it or to your house. Now, suddenly, there's no commodity of scale because there isn't a million people that want that same lamp in your neighborhood, right? So now you've got individualized, complex items that need to go to a vast variety of places to fulfill that end retail requirement, and that's why it's so expensive. There's not as much of an opportunity to consolidate those things. So what we use is data science and AI and other techniques, traditional operations, algorithms and mathematics to do as much consolidation and as much grouping to get those efficiencies of scale at the last mile. Hopefully that makes sense.
Can I ask a technical question? Like, as you do that, the optimization could be lots of different flavors. If you can say, like, do you use more like mixed integer programming? Do you use more constraint programming? Do you have your own heuristics? Like, how have you tackled that last mile, the optimization of that last mile?
Here we go, Mike. Mike getting right into the details.
I am sorry, I dug right into the details
wh-
right away. I'm so
where's my
curious.
co-founder? I'm looking around the room like, come help. No, I can tell you enough to keep it interesting, but the reason I mentioned that in joke is because my co-founder is actually a PhD in computer science and with a specific focus on optimization,
Perfect.
multi-objective optimization, and AI. And he did a lot of work in Singapore and here in Australia, where we're based, for all sorts of interesting machine learning projects with an optimization goal. And so, when we started building our technology, one of the biggest innovations up front was that we realized that there was an opportunity to do more multidimensional clustering. And so, if I don't want to make this a route optimization kind of detail masterclass, but to answer your question, what we decided on is that there's for high density, high volume delivery, cluster first, route second is the strategy that we've adopted. And that's not a
Cool.
common strategy because it's known to be less optimal. So if you look into the research community, researchers will often say, hey, guys, that's a terrible strategy because you're never going to get to true optimality. And we said, well, you know what? Your typical vehicle, commercial delivery vehicle, is running 40% empty at any given time. I don't need full optimality. What I need is a dramatic improvement over what's happening with the state of the art. And so, in order to enable that cluster first, route second methodology, we had to adopt some MIP, mixed integer programming, and
Yep.
linear programming techniques, and some machine learning, and some k-means algorithms to do that clustering all together. And the reason is because it's not just about geospatial, two-dimensional on a map clustering. It's about when you order something, you have an expected delivery date. You might have a time window during that time where you're only going to be available during a certain time window in the day. You've got constraints on the vehicle and the type of vehicle. What types of products can they carry? How much volume can they carry of certain types of products? If it's cold chain, you can't mix ambient and chilled and frozen together in the same truck, right? You have different types of vehicles.
Right.
So all of those different constraints is why we use mixed integer programming and machine learning together to then do this grouping, which we then use more traditional algorithms to execute the routing.
Perfect. So sorry for taking it down that technical path, but I'm always so curious about these problems. They're so hard to solve.
Me too. I mean, this is why I get up excited every day, is because it really is a bit of really traditional old school research, but still developing on the frontier with new techniques that we're discovering all the time. And it's so fun being able to, again, my kind of ninja skill, as Vijay alluded to, is commercializing research. I'm not a researcher myself. I'm not an academic, but I love working with these brilliant people who are doing that research and then figuring out how to make it practical.
So, Rich, kind of who is your buyer? Like what kind of organization, but also who within the organization?
Great question. So we started off focusing on these high density, high volume examples. And so I'll give you a really easy example of that, which is a company here in Australia called Home Delivery Services. And despite the very humble sounding name, they're actually a massive third party logistics company that does deliveries for all sorts of straight to home food products, meal kits, things like that. So, you'd be familiar with Blue Apron and HelloFresh and Marley Spoon. Now imagine you've got tens of thousands of orders of those coming in dynamically every day. They use our optimization engine under the hood to then create delivery routes for all their vans. Now, so that's kind of the customer archetype for that product we sell is this large third-party logistics company. Within those companies, the actual buyers tend to be a mix. It's actually one of our biggest challenges is that we have very different buyer archetypes depending on the point in their journey. It's always enterprise, so we really focus on medium and large enterprise. And inside there, maybe it's the CFO who's saying, look, guys, our margins are really, really tight. We need to figure out ways to get better margins. Maybe it's a operations lead or COO that says, I am tired of being drowned in problems and exceptions. We really need to get a technology that can help us to smooth out the operations. If there's efficiency that comes with that too, that's great. But like, I'm tired of fighting fires and I need technology to help me. And then the third one is the sustainability people, which are getting more and more power over time. They're getting more and more seats at the boardroom table, and so we do get introductions now via sustainability people who can then say, "Look, we need to reduce our scope 1, our scope 3 emissions. Here's a company that can help us do that, and let's make the financial picture work in order to enable the emissions reduction."
So I'm gonna. You mentioned something that your one of your sweet spot is like commercializing research and new technology, and I think that's a super interesting role. Is like kind of playing in the middle. Like, what advice or how do you get up to speed on something like optimization, and how do you make it real within your company? Because I imagine you have to make tough decisions about which features get in, which features don't, and you have a say at that, but you're not the expert in optimization. Like, how do you balance that, and how do you think about that?
Well, and you guys are startup guys yourselves, right? You've been there, you've been on the entrepreneurship journey, and I think the one guiding principle to guide those product decisions is customer led. We really take a customer led approach. It's very tempting to follow lots of distractions and build features that you think are going to be so cool and you think are going to be needed. But at the end of the day, I just spend a lot of time talking to our customers and solving very specific problems for them. And we kind of have a guiding principle as well that we don't just build features that our customers want because they say they want them. We interrogate why they want them. And then if there's a quorum of customers that say, we want this, and I hear it multiple times from different customers, not so surprisingly, it gets added to our product roadmap. If it's distractions from customers, that's probably one of the more challenging parts of my role is because I could have a big customer that comes to me and says, I really need this feature. And unless they're willing to pay a large amount of money for us to be distracted to build that, I can't just distract the whole company to build that for them. And then I have to do some delicate dancing, to figure out how to make sure that they're still happy, but, we're building the features that are really important to them.
Right. Yeah. I had that when I was doing some product development, I had that role, the same role as you, is like talk to the customers quite a bit, try to get their feedback and try to set it up so that you can't promise something if there's a feature that just doesn't fit, it's too hard to do. And then of course there's back and forth with the development team, like, all right, what can you actually do? And then sometimes number 6 on the list gets bumped up because it's super easy, and number 5 gets bumped down because it's like really, really hard, and 5 and 6 are close anyway. So I'm sure you go through some of those discussions as well.
Actually, I want to combine the last two talking points to dig into something, and that is we've talked about different buyers and different perspectives and stakeholders around the Adiona platform. Uh, but you've also probably got a similar spectrum of users. And how do you kind of make those trade-offs and those design decisions for those different constituencies?
Ooh, that's so relevant to what we're going through right now as well, Vijay, because when we designed the platform, and Mike can appreciate this with the LlamaSoft background, we didn't design it to be a delivery network simulation or digital twin tool, but we accidentally built that. What we built it for was to be a very API first, high density optimization commodity type of engine, right? If you want the lowest cost, most efficient deliveries for your big volume organization. That's what we built. That was our goal. That's what our customer wanted. But what we realized over the last 3 years that we've been on the market selling this is that our front end, our user interface, our web applications are so good. And I say that with all humility because it's my team that built it, not me. They're so good and so easy to use for non-technical operators, for people who work in warehouses and people who are not data scientists, that they're doing all sorts of other simulations that we didn't really plan for. And the one that's jumped out the most in the last year is selling. So imagine you're a dispatcher or a route planner. You're somebody who sits in a warehouse and has to plan the routes for 100 trucks tomorrow, right? So you use our software to do that. Now your sales team comes up and sneaks up behind you and says, "Hey, that's pretty cool, and this routing works pretty well. I've got a opportunity with a new customer. They're going to need us to do 10,000 deliveries a month. How many vans will I need to do that, and what's it going to cost?" And the operations person says, I don't know. I'm busy routing for tomorrow. Okay. I gotta get this stuff out the door." And the salesperson says, "Well, can you just add me to this program and I'll load in some data and do a simulation to see how much it's going to cost for this bid or this tender?" And suddenly we see all these users in our back end, because I'm snooping on my customers and I'm seeing all these people that, "You're not in operations, you're in the sales team. What are you doing?" And that really transformed the direction for us because we realized, oh, okay, there's actually a big market of people who want to increase their top line revenue. And one of the struggles they have is that they don't have any dedicated tools to do that. They're still working in Excel and with Google Maps. And if they have something really savvy like Esri, ArcGIS, Coupa, Llamasoft, like really, mature heavyweight platforms, they can do it in that, but that's overshooting what they actually need. They need to just get in, roll up the sleeves, and do something quick and dirty in a day or two. So that's the sweet spot that we've been really trying to figure out. Honestly, I don't have all the answers yet, but the breadth of our users go from people who are really tactical, got to get these deliveries out, up all the way to COOs that are saying, what is my next network going to look like? We open up this vertical into a new delivery space. What does my warehouse situation need to look like? And they can use Adiona to do that.
Yeah, it's funny. As you were talking about that, I was thinking we saw the same thing when we were doing advertising, network optimization. The sales team looking at the marginal value of different things being added to the network. What's different in your environment is the bricks and mortar nature of building capacity and giving them a tool to kind of plan around those types of capital decisions. Inadvertently, you may have given them that tool, but probably extremely valuable.
And that's part of the journey now is we're trying to figure out exactly what is that value and how do we package it in a way, because there's such different use cases, and our marketing was never really designed around those other use cases. So we're trying to figure that out.
So as you're thinking about that, how do you think about, do you have 2 products or 1 product? Like, this is always a dilemma when you're, a software company. Like, how have you what's been your philosophy now? Is it, 1 product for everyone, or have you always had multiple products for different, types of customers?
No, it's always been one product, and I think that's something that needs to change. That's just because it was convenient, and when you're a young bootstrapping company, you do have to try and streamline everything you do and be as minimalist as you can, minimum viable product type of approach.
Yep,
Now we're at a level of maturity where we do have to maximize our revenue, optimize our revenue around different product features and different product modules.
that makes sense. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I know that, and I want to say this with all due respect to the transportation industry, it's not a very tech savvy population. The dispatchers, historically, they've been kind of roll up your sleeves, often off the trucks and into dispatch.
Yeah.
How do you get them on board with this platform, with all this algorithmic complexity underneath? And how do you the journey to trust is always fascinating to me.
Journey to trust. That is absolutely right. And there's different archetypes of people who work in that environment. There's ones that are very technology forward and understand their own value is more than just doing the routing or making sure the vans get on the road and the trucks get on the road. They understand that their value as the human in the loop is as the problem solver. But then you've got the opposite polarity, which is people who are super threatened by technology because they feel like it'll erode their value, and then you've got everywhere in between. So that journey to trust is very dependent on the organization. There's no one size fits all answer because it is highly dependent on the personalities that exist. And as you know, some of these people, like you said, came from a trucking background or somewhere else, a warehouse background, and so you have to really try to understand the psychology of what your barriers to selling are for those people, and then adapt your journey to trust to that personality. So if it's someone, for instance, who is super tech savvy, I will approach the sale in a very different way than I will with somebody who's threatened by the technology. And what we highlight in terms of the value for those different users will be very different.
Does that, as you train the users and sort of try to build that trust, do you have a consulting arm that helps with that? Do you rely on partners? Like, how do you there must be a step after you've sold and the client brings the technology in-house, like, how do you get them up and running successfully?
Yeah, and we've typically done it ourselves. We're building out a partner network now, so we can
Okay.
leverage some of our partners like KPMG and some of the transport management software companies that we work with, like Carton Cloud and Infocom. So they're great because they have more complicated products and solutions. They have a bigger diversity of stuff that they're selling, and so they tend to have big teams for implementation. We rely on them. But the other side of that as well is we do have to adapt that training and onboarding to the point in the journey that they're at.
So I'm interested. It's been great to kind of dive into what you're doing and how you're doing it and some of the challenges. I'm interested in kind of how the company came about. How did you wander into this space?
Well, as you so graciously introed me, background in engineering, always just been a problem solver. Originally wanted to be a doctor, got sidetracked by engineering, and medical devices was the perfect combination of the two. And so I was actually really happy in the medical device space. But um, one of the stories that I like to tell is you have to be very careful about who you trust and who you work with in this life and in this world. Because I did have a really great situation in a company that I loved, but it wasn't an entrepreneurial company in the traditional sense, or sorry, in the modern sense, not traditional sense. It was more in the traditional sense where it was very totalitarian. It was a very top down structure,
Yeah.
and there were no options or equity share on the table. And eventually I got to a point where I was doing so much innovation and so much entrepreneurship in this company at a very senior executive level that I said, well, I really feel like in a modern context, I deserve some equity stake if I want to stay here. And that just wasn't an option. So I had to make the hard choice of deciding, well, do I want to stay in somebody else's company for the rest of my life? Or do I want to go and do my own thing? And I dabbled in startups before. I actually had started a web business that I'd sold, but basically um, at a wash,
Yeah.
at cost, shall we say? So I'd got some experience, and I decided, okay, cool. I'm at a point in my career and in my life where if I don't do a proper startup now, I'm probably not going to. And then it became what? Well, what do I want to do? And one of the challenges that I'd seen in real life was my sister had always worked in retail. I think I mentioned this to you, Vijay.
Yes, yes.
Um,
And it's
she
a good
worked
one
in
for our
grocery
audience to
store.
hear as well.
Okay, cool. I'll give the brief version, but basically, my sister had always worked in retail. She's working at a grocery store, and she would go past three instances of that same grocery chain to get to the one that she worked at. And that didn't make any sense to me that she was driving 30 minutes to go work in a grocery store. And it was a, relatively straightforward role there. She wasn't doing anything specialized. And I said, well, why can't you get a transfer or something to one of these same stores that's closer, right down the street? And she said, well, it's just not the way it works. And I'd never really thought about that, but she was 100% right. That's just not the way it works. There's a job opening, you go get that job. If they have multiple sites and it's close by, maybe if you're a white collar professional at an executive level, they will consider transferring you, like if you're working for a Fortune 500 company. But if you're working at a grocery store, that's just not something they even think about. But the benefits are super tangible. And I think it was Stanford that did a bunch of studies around tenure in a job is directly correlated to your commute time. If you work somewhere nearby to where you live, you will stay in that job longer. And when you stay in that job longer, it reduces the company's recruitment costs, churn costs, time to productivity costs. There's all sorts of benefits. And there's even a social benefit where people in low wage jobs who have a longer commute are actually more likely to go to prison. And when you unpack the reason for that, especially if you're into prison reform and those types of topics, the reason is because if you have to rely on public transport to get to a job that's far away and you miss your train or your bus, you're more likely to be late. And then because it's a low wage job, you're more likely to have 3 strikes and be fired. And so there's this whole social fabric that we deal with every day about people commuting long distances to low wage jobs that nobody has addressed. And I decided that's my thing. I'm going to address that. So we went out and collected data. I collected real world data. My co-founder built an algorithm. We showed that for a large grocery chain, you can re-optimize people and their commutes to reduce the aggregate commute by 31%. And we proved it, but we couldn't sell it. We spent about a year and a half solving that problem and realized that the human resources software system was not ready for it. And no matter how hard we pushed and how much money we raised, it didn't look like they were going to be ready for it anytime in the near future. And then we had to make a hard decision about, well, what do we do now? We've spent a year and a half, nearly 2 years invested in this. And we were very lucky. Along that journey, we got introduced to Coca-Cola and the Coca-Cola bottler down here in this part of the world, which is now owned by Coca-Cola Europe Pacific Partners. And they said, guys, really interesting what you're doing. You're clearly very smart with optimization, but we can't use this. But we do have some big hair on fire problems with our transport and our logistics. Could you adapt this framework that you've built to do something interesting for transport and logistics? And we said, well, we've never really thought about it, but we'll give it a try. And we partnered with them and we built them a custom route optimization algorithm. It's not really using the technology we'd already developed, but inspired by the technology we'd already developed, right? And it worked so well that they were like, cool, this is great. We'll use it. And then we were off and running from there. So that's kind of how we
That's cool.
navigated that.
What would you do with the IP from the previous go? Have you open sourced that IP or is it just sitting around?
It's just sitting around, to be honest.
Okay. Just sitting around waiting for the right time. Yeah. No, it's always kind of an interesting thing. Like, what do you do with that? It's hard to open source it and hard to give it away. It's sometimes hard to get others to adopt it and use it.
It's a lot of work actually to get the awareness out there, and there's a lot of academics that know about it, people that we've worked with, people that we've, are aware of that. And we do get questions about it sometimes, but yeah, it's just not something that we've invested a lot of time in since, unfortunately.
Well, what's interesting to me, Rich, is nice to hear you talk about what we in Silicon Valley have euphemistically learned to call the pivot, which sounds so much more intentional, and yet so often it's circumstantial, and new markets and opportunities open up in a way that nobody saw coming. It's a long story how I became an expert in call center operations, but that wasn't what I was dreaming about as a small child growing up. And on that note, I'm interested, Rich, as you said, you've got engineering background. How did you kind of find your way into commercialization as being the thing that kind of your ninja talent or your superpower?
Oh, that's fun. I was just telling this story the other day because I was in Fiji, of all places, at the Asia Pacific Postal Union meeting, right? Because we were working with postal organizations and stuff because they're about as high volume, high density as you get. And anyway, I was with a VP of sales from another company in our space, and we were just talking about sales and how hard it is as a founder to learn sales when you come from an engineering background, right? For me, it's not natural. But when I was in my first medical device role out of uni, I went to Northeastern. I kind of, I talk. I like to talk. I like people. I'm a bit of an ambivert. I really enjoy hearing people's stories. And the sales and marketing team at the company I was working at, a company called Smiths, which more famous for their airport detection systems, but they actually had a pretty significant medical device business as well. The sales and marketing team at Smiths said, "Oh, Rich, you're pretty chatty and you like talking to the doctors and the surgeons and stuff. Do you want to come to a conference with us? And you can work the booth and you can just chat with the doctors and collect intel, ask them questions and all that." I said, "Yeah, that sounds fun." And man, it was the first proper conference I'd ever been to, professional conference. I was just, I was 20 years old or something. And I was like, whoa, this is so fun. I'm talking to all these doctors, all these surgeons, all these key opinion leaders, the top voices in this field. And I'm learning so much at this extraordinary rate. And it was just like a dream come true because I could be the technical resource telling them how to potentially solve these problems that they're talking about from their real world operating room experiences. And just they're peppering me with all of these challenges that have gone unsolved. And what more exciting of a thing for an engineer than to have these willing participants telling you all of their problems and asking you, can you solve this for me? And my company being like, yeah, well, that's what we want to do. So you can be that conduit in between. And that just absolutely blew my mind that there was a role for people who could bridge the gap between the problems in a very complex field and the researchers that are coming up with solutions and me being able to figure out how to make it practical. That was just so exciting.
Oh, thanks for sharing that story because I love to tell students that they're engineering students that there exists such a path in this world. Like you can be this technical sales role, and I think engineers like naturally shy away from sales, having some vision of what it might be from media or something. It's like, yes, no, there's a great role there, and it trains you to
Yeah,
be a founder, right? Like having that skill is like totally valuable for starting your company now and keeping it going.
absolutely right, Mike. I mean, I don't think I ever would have properly gone down the entrepreneurship path without that bridge for me because it gave me a lot of confidence.
I,
There
you
you
know,
go.
it's interesting. I've been thinking about this for the last couple of days. I read a thing about what the writer called founder market fit. But the upshot was that you need a certain amount of credibility to get people to talk to you and to share their operational details and their challenges and their pain points. And this seems like it was a perfect situation because you were there representing your company that was already credible and established in that space. And people were keen to share. And you do have something I can already tell from our brief conversations, a knack for drawing people out that is an underrated skill. And
It's so
that
true.
combination of credibility and curiosity in that space, boy, that's something, Mike, we got to figure out how to teach our students.
Right.
Well, I love telling the story of that first example I told you where with the commute optimization thing, we collected data. Well, do you know how I collected that data? And this is where, the old adage of courage is being afraid and doing it anyway. Um, I literally put on, a nice suit. I put on a lanyard, and I had a clipboard, a physical wooden clipboard. And this is only a few years ago, but you know, and I walked into grocery stores and I walked up to employees and I said, "I'm doing a survey on commute issues and commute strain for people. Would you be willing to tell me the postcode, the zip code from where you commute from? Obviously, I'm not going to ask people for their home address to,
Yes.
to
Right.
get here and whether you travel on public transport or whether you drive or other. And I got 250 data points and got kicked out of 3 grocery stores. So any founder who comes up to me and tells me that they can't get real data, they don't know who to talk to, I say, it's there. You need to figure it out. And this is a story telling you of how I did it. And it felt super uncomfortable and awkward, but you just gotta, if you really are serious, you gotta
Yeah.
power through and do it.
Oh, love it. It's a great story.
One manager, even I loved this manager. One manager came up to me and said, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" Blah blah blah. And I explained, and I was ready to be kicked out. And she said, "Oh well, if you're going to do this, you need a visitor badge. Come with me," and just signed me into the visitor log. I still
Right.
have this sticker, this visitor sticker, in my notebook in the cover as a reminder that that's how you get things done.
Perfect, perfect. Is there any advice like now you're in the supply chain optimization world, is there anything that you learn anything that the medical device world does that you like skills or ideas that you brought in from that industry to this one that help or that supply chain and optimization people should think about?
Mike, nobody's ever asked me that, but it's such an important factor actually because one of the reasons that my co-founder and I get along so well and we're so symbiotic is that he's got an extraordinary attention to detail and quality, and that's what medical devices teach you. I was there for 15 years, and you get taught risk assessment, risk mitigation, attention to quality, and focus on quality.
Okay.
And when you're selling enterprise software, I don't know if you guys have been through this yourselves, but I'm sure you've
Oh,
probably
for
seen
sure.
it.
Yeah.
Like things break and your software goes down and your customers are losing their minds. And a lot of startups just don't have any of that rigor built into them, especially the younger they are. I think obviously older founders have a bit of an advantage there generally, but also just I was super demanding on my team that this had to be reliable enterprise grade software. And they said, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, I'll teach you what it means. I'll teach you how to do it because I was building pacemakers. I know what reliability is, but also then finding the balance of saying, well, I can't build it to be as rigorous as a class 3 medical device implantable.
Right.
There's got to be some medium ground. And that was instructive to me as well, trying to figure out where do I give way in quality for enterprise SaaS versus a pacemaker. And, finding that right balance too has been a really fun journey.
Oh, that's a great answer because I hadn't thought it through in it, but now that you say it, it's like totally makes sense because logistics, supply chain optimization people, the good ones pay attention to detail and appreciate that. And you come with even more, like the medical device is even more, life and death, literally. And that's a good
Well, think
skill to
about
bring over. Good,
cybersecurity now, right? Cybersecurity being such a critical issue for software vendors, right? And I
yeah,
came into it with the mindset of cybersecurity top of mind because it's a fatal blow to the company if you get hacked at the early
right,
stage. And so little things like that where I think more, green, naive founders might just be really laser focused on the product, and that's great. You have to be, but those surrounding things are what allow you to sell to enterprise. Because if enterprise
yeah.
sniffs you out as a startup, they don't want to work with you. You have to kind of feel like enterprise to them, and it's all part of the reality of this landscape is perception. Um, and you have to make sure that your perception is well crafted. And I definitely screwed that up big time initially. I did not have an appreciation for marketing. Our marketing was terrible. Our branding was terrible. And I realized that we were just alienating a lot of our potential customers and partners because you have to really be attuned to the perception.
The perception's interesting because, this is what was one of my startups experiences. I tell this to other founders too who are getting the business. It's like, let's say you've worked really, really, really hard and grown your business to like 2 or 3 million in revenue, which is like a big number for a startup. But I tell people, like, if you're going to sell to a Fortune 500 company, that sounds like a tiny, tiny number. Like, they have budgets that are way bigger than that. So keep that satisfaction to yourself and, judiciously spill that out because it doesn't sound as big to them as it does to you.
It's so true. And I tell founders that, my peers and friends or whatever, sometimes they'll be on LinkedIn promoting themselves as this great startup, and I'm like, guys, if you're trying to sell to enterprise, just keep that to yourself. Yeah, exactly like you said,
Right.
celebrate it behind closed doors. It is important. Your investors will be thrilled, but your customers, they don't want to have any perception of risk.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
I think if I had one final question, the one that we typically ask, usually Mike gets to ask it, but I'm going to seize the moment today. Rich, what kind of two parts? Where can our listeners find out more about Adiona? And what kinds of things are you listening to, reading these days? Favorite podcasts, books, people that you're following in the space? Any tips and tricks?
Oh, that's wonderful. Definitely to find me, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm active there. I love having a chat with people, and I'm very passionate about this space. So anybody who wants to talk about it, always reach out to me, Rich Savoie on LinkedIn. Um, and we're based in Sydney. For anybody who's listening who might be confused and be like, "Wait a minute, this guy sounds American, but why does his profile say that he's in Australia?" Yes, it's true. I am in Australia. My wife lured me here. And anybody who wants to come and visit from your listeners, feel free to reach out to me. I've always got great advice on the Australia bucket list trips. Um, and yeah, look, I'm reading a book right now called Epic Execution. And it's by a guy named David Kenny, who's an Australian but worked in Silicon Valley for many years and works with all the VCs down here. And it's the right book at the right time in my journey because it's all about focusing on sales expansion and sales growth. And like Mike, what you were mentioning, productization and revenue optimization. How do we modularize the solution? So it's been an amazing book. And David's actually, a friend of mine and a mentor. So I highly recommend that one. Um, and then the other thing that I love that a lot of people still don't maybe know about, or maybe they haven't marketed it as well, is a app called Blinkist. Have you heard of Blinkist?
Oh, new to me.
I have.
It's great. I mean, it was an early forerunner of ChatGPT's ability to summarize things, but basically they consume all these great business books and then give you tailored
Oh,
summaries of advice based on the questions you have.
yeah.
Um, and I think because they have access to the full book as well, it's great. It's better than any LLM because you can go in there with a specific thing that you need to learn. For me, go to market strategy or things like that. I
Mhm.
can learn all the distilled advice from all the best entrepreneurs, but then whichever ones resonate to me the best, boom, I click through and go right to that book in digital form and then consume the whole book. So love that.
Excellent. Well,
Perfect.
Rich, it's been
Well,
great having you on, and we wish you and Adiona nothing but the best. And maybe we'll have you back on as part of a broader discussion about sustainability and operations. Uh, and I will say, I was really glad you flagged testing from your device experience. We've had a couple of guests that really have called out the importance of testing for optimization algorithms, particularly things that are in production in real time that people are depending on. So, really great episode.
yeah, thanks, Rich. Appreciate it.
Yeah, really wonderful to talk to people that understand what we're going through as well. To be honest, it's a bit cathartic when you have these types of experiences with folks like yourselves who are so experienced in this space and actually get it. So thank you for that.
All right, thanks.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Decision Intelligence Lab podcast. If you got value from our conversation, please like and share. And if you'd like to subscribe directly to the podcast, just send us an email at decisionintelligencepodcast@gmail.com.